Hello, everyone. So, welcome to episode 6 of the Let's Chat About Money podcast series. So, today I'm joined by Bobby Seagull, who's a maths teacher, a broadcaster, and a writer. You might know him from his days on University Challenge, where he trended on Twitter. And since going on there, he's appeared on numerous TV shows. And I know he's got an interest in personal finance, so I've really been excited to get him on the podcast. And yeah, Bobby, I don't know if you want to say hello and maybe give a brief introduction about yourself if there's anything I haven't covered.
Yeah, hi. Pleasure to be on your podcast. I've watched some of or listened to your videos on YouTube, and they're great. So it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a Southerner, but Northerners, I think, are more friendly and down to earth. It's always a pleasure to work with a Northerner.
And before we kind of jump into the main questions I've got for you, I wondered if you wanted to maybe just give a bit of a brief overview of how the sort of university challenge and career after, how that all started. So I understand it may have been when you were doing was it your PGC or your PhD? Is that when you got involved with University Challenge?
Yeah, because we may come back to it later, but I also in my 20s I had a career working in finance, and we may discuss some of those details in a bit. But I changed careers, become a teacher, was doing my PGC, then my master's, then my doctorate. But during my master's year at Cambridge, I was captain of their college team, so Emmanuel College, Cambridge, on University Challenge. And then I ended up unexpectedly going viral on social media for my enthusiasm. I remember I was trending on Twitter. I was actually, at that time, I was a full-time teacher and a head of department. So my students were quite excited. Like, oh, Mr. Seagull, look, you're trending. Look, you're on Instagram, sir. Your memes, even memes made out of you. And the likes of Louis Theroux and Stephen Fry were tweeting about me. So it was all mad. And I think on the quiz show University Challenge every year, there are maybe a couple of people, 3 people that get their 15 minutes of inverted commas fame. I don't like the word fame, but they get that. But I think the reason why I sort of stuck it, so now 7 years ago, is because obviously it's fun doing the inverted commas things that are just like celebrity related, but I've got a real mission about maths and getting people to be educated and getting people to be literate and numerate and be more aware of personal finance. I think that gives me longevity because I've got a real raison d'etre to be a public figure.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one of the places I wanted to start with this conversation was around career changes, because when I read about your personal finance story, what I thought was really interesting is that from what I've read, you started your career doing investment banking, and then you became an accountant. So you are working in the city, and then you switched gears and then moved into teaching. Now, I think for a lot of people, the expectation is that with age, you're on this linear trajectory with your earnings, and then the older you get, the more that you earn. And people talk about peak earning power and when those years are. But for you, I guess there's probably a point earlier on in your career where you did a bit of a dive with your earnings. So I don't know if you want to touch a bit on that and what motivated you to change careers in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. So my degree was maths and economics. So back then in the mid 2000s, anyone that's numerate and lives near London, because I always think there's a privilege about living in or near London, because if you live, let's say, Aberdeen, going far north, and you're interested in maths and numbers, it's harder to get to a big city with a big financial prospect. But I became a trader at Lehman Brothers. I think the 3rd or 4th biggest investment bank in the world, earning lots of money. To be honest, I won't complain. The money was very good. And then Lehman Brothers collapsed. Then I moved on to Nomura, a Japanese investment bank, as a trader as well. Then a little sideways switch because my dad was a chartered accountant, or is a chartered accountant. And he always said to me, Bobby, if banking seems unstable, if you get a qualification, at least you've got something to fall back on. So a little sideways step, qualified as a chartered accountant at PwC. And at the time I thought either I'm going to go back into banking in the sort of corporate side, like mergers and acquisitions and things like that, or I'll move into private equity, or I'll stay and become a partner, or finally I'll go and run some big FTSE 100 and become CFO of like Sainsbury and then eventually become CEO. But okay, so my 20s, earning good money, having a materially good life, but it was a busy life. But when I was 30, I took a sabbatical at PwC, and I taught new graduates at the firm, and I loved the teaching so much. It was 2, 3 months, and not only did I get my best internal ratings, like I always did well in terms of the ratings and the bonuses, but they were my top ever. Like I got top of the class, as it were, for being a grad tutor. And I also found it made me come to life and made me realize actually this is where I think my true calling is, because whilst I earned more in my 20s than I did in my 30s, and now I just turned 40. I earned more money then. I would say that I'm more fulfilled now. I love what I do more. So I took the big decision to take a significant pay cut, become a teacher. And at the time, I didn't realize that any of this university challenge media stuff would work. But I definitely still felt with the teaching early days when I was full-time, part-time, when I was full-time, it was still a very rewarding profession. I love being with the young people. There's a separate question about whether people can sustain full-time careers in teaching. It's really hard. Like I remember I was a head of department, managing staff, teaching myself, marking papers. I almost feel as if there needs to be other roles, whether teachers have worked 3, 4 days a week and a day or two doing something else. But full-time teaching for like 20, 30 years is a hard career. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I do know a few teachers, and it takes over the life during term time, and they even have that thing during school holidays where the week or the few days or the week before they go back, it's on the mind, and it's sort of never really escape from feeling like you're always thinking about schooling. And just in terms of lifestyle that you were living, so did you have to think a lot about the money side of things when you made that career change? Was that one of the decision factors that you had to bear in mind, or were you totally driven by the passion of going into teaching?
So I'd like to say it's purely driven by the passion, but the reality is we live in a world where you've got to be pragmatic. So again, it's one of those things where I'll acknowledge some of my privilege, because had I lived, let's say, in a rural village in Wales, and I was living in London with a city job and renting a flat or an apartment, but then moving back to rural Wales suddenly, life, it would have been more tricky. But because I had parents that lived in London, I could stay at home, I could save on rent. So it made the decision easier because I had a family to fall back on. But when I earned a lot of money in my 20s, but I spent a lot as well. But when I changed careers, I think because I was single and had no mortgage and no significant, again, I've never been a huge spender. It meant that I could have adjusted from the 6 figures to the 20K reasonably well. And because I tend to spend my time and money on experiences rather than things, it meant the adjustment was easy to shift. Okay, had I been married and with a family, I think it would have been a very, imagine telling the missus, sorry, we're going to have to cut expenditure by 70%, and the kids, you're sending them to private school? No thanks anymore, we're going to send them to the local comprehensive. That's a more difficult decision. So when it impacts myself, I think I could follow my passion.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting perspective, because I think it is a lot harder for people once they settle down and once they have these commitments in place for them to have career changes. So I think for a lot of people, they end up postponing some of these things until they're nearing retirement, and maybe they retire from one job and then start another where there's less, maybe they've paid off the mortgage and there's less reliance on that monthly income. And then just thinking about your education. So this is what I very interested in, because I have a maths degree as well. So I went to the University of Edinburgh, and you mentioned at the start that you have a maths and economics background. You've got a love for numbers, and you are an ambassador for national numeracy. And I'll just read out a quote that's on the website. I don't know if you remember saying this, but the quote is that you believe that everyone can do maths and definitely improve their numeracy. And we need to dispel the myth that only certain types of people have a mind for numbers. And I think that's really important, because as someone who grew up in the Northeast, I think, it's probably the same. I went to state school. It's probably the same in lots of schools. Sometimes maths can be quite an overwhelming subject for people. And I think people dismiss it. If they're not good at maths in primary school, they come to secondary school, they can dismiss maths and they can label themselves as someone who's not very good at maths. But as you'll know yourself, maths features in every aspect of life. You sort of understanding an interest rate, that you're going to pay on your mortgage, if you haven't got those foundation math skills, and that could be quite difficult. But just thinking about your own education, how was your education? Did you go to state school, or was it private school you were educated at?
So when I was younger, so from 5 till 16, I grew up in a council estate in East London. So that, to be honest, it was a very challenging upbringing in terms of the environment, but very, very loving home, great parents. We went to a local library a lot. Then I was 16, I got a scholarship for my council estate in East London and my state school to Eton College.
Wow.
And you can imagine the sort of culture shock going from a council estate where people are wearing Kappa and Adidas and Reebok classics. On my first day at Eton, and the kids thought, like, am I the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? Because I sort of dressed up a bit like a baseball cap, etc. And I slowly learned to not adapt. I think I wore some of the sort of, like Ralph Lauren's and things, but I realized that's quite expensive. So I had to fake Ralph Lauren's from East London markets. But again, so that was my sort of schooling experience. And we will come to my university experience shortly as well. But one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about education is I saw the difference between my state school friends and my Eton friends wasn't necessarily of academic ability. It was more the expectations and opportunities that independent schools give you. Because at my state school, I remember one of my teachers, actually a very good teacher, one of the best teachers I had. He said, I was the top student in my school, in fact, the top student in my borough by the time I did my exams at 16. But he said to me, "Oh, Bobby, you're really great. You should be a dentist." And there's nothing wrong with being a dentist. We all need good dentists. And if you've got a dental ache, I'd pay a lot of money for a good dentist to sort things out. But if you've got the top student in your school, maybe the top student ever at the time, until my brother surpassed me, annoyingly, for a teacher to say them to be a dentist, that's a bit like capping someone's limit of their potential. Whereas at Eton, even if you're like towards the bottom of the year, they'll say, you could be prime minister, you could be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or you could be an Olympic gold medal rower, or you can be a politician. So I think it's the expectation. Obviously, people don't always reach the expectation, but I think that's the key difference I found. One is the expectation, and then the second is like the opportunity. Because at my state school, there weren't really networks. There's no old boys network. Whereas at Eton, if you wanted to get work experience in any place, you could probably knock on the door of your neighbor. And by one stage, one of my neighbors, his dad was leader of the Conservative Party at the time.
Oh, right.
So it's like, okay, that's quite cool. That's quite different from my East London experience. I think, that's what's always given me a passion about education.
And it is interesting that about expectations and, not having ceilings to potential. And I wonder if, coming from a working class background myself, if it is very much a working class thing, because I know a lot of people who I went to school with who did very well at GCSE, A-level, university, have now got professional jobs. They can suffer a lot from imposter syndrome. So they're in these careers and they're thinking, I don't deserve to be here. But I sometimes wonder if that's maybe from our roots in the school system, that maybe we weren't I don't know, encouraged to sort of fake it until we make it. It was very much like, once you get your exams, you can see then what you can do if you're good enough.
Sadly, I think you're right about that. Like, even now, I just turned 40 recently, and I compare my friends from my state school background and my friends from my Eton experience. Not all, but the vast majority of my Eton friends don't have imposter syndrome. Some do, but the vast majority don't. But a significant minority to majority of my state school friends, even the ones I've done well, got good city jobs, good professional jobs, a lot of them sometimes tell me, Bobby, how am I managing like 20 people? Well, why am I here? So there's definitely, I think that maybe it's like, if you're brought up in an environment where you're taught to be grateful, you might feel a bit of an imposter. If you're brought up in an environment where you're sort of taught you will get to the top, then you never feel imposter syndrome.
I guess it's an important balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
And when did you first realize that you had a passion for maths? Did your sort of interest in maths, was that early on, or was it when you went to Eton that you really became interested in maths?
To be honest, at Eton, strangely enough, my strongest subject at school was history.
Oh, right.
Academically, like there's 250 boys in the year, and I'd come the top five, six, seven for maths. So still, like those peers would do really well at University of Maths. But history, I came top. And some of these history, it's funny, some of my peers and near peers are like world-class historians. So maybe I should have become a historian. But my sort of passion for maths came through when I was in primary school, and it's when I used to collect football stickers, and then I was massively into the stats behind the stickers, and then the ages, heights, goals scored, left foot, league tables, and transfer fees. And I think I realized the power of maths and understanding football. So actually, probably about 7, 8 is when it all clicked, and I realized. And then I think for that age, when I was 5, 6, 7, I was good at maths, but when I was about 7, 8, when I found the maths aspect of football, then I started really flying ahead of my peers because I would spend more time like working out averages and mean median mode, and then doing like standard deviations a few years earlier. I wanted to work out things. So I think it was football and stats that got me into mathematics, really.
Yeah, that is interesting. So I did Irish dancing when I was growing up.
Oh, nice.
And I used to do competitions in Irish dancing, and they used to have like big competitions every year, like the World Championships and things. And it's a very niche thing, kind of. A lot of people do it, but it's still a niche thing, Irish dancing.
Yeah.
And I similar to you, in terms of looking at results, I was very interested in working out the averages of kind of like previous time series of World Championships. If you look at the past 10 competitions, who's come out on top, averaging, the best. And it is interesting, I think, for me, because when you realize that you can apply maths in a different context, it does become interesting. And given that this podcast is about personal finance, what's your take on kind of a good foundational sort of understanding of numbers and numeracy, and also then being able to manage your money and understand finances? Do you think there's a link there?
I think when you ask most people, what's an APR, what's an interest rate, what impact does the Bank of England statements have? A lot of people are like, oh, what? Like, as long as their bank statement doesn't bounce, or they don't get overcharged, people sort of almost like are just hoping things work out with their money. And the reason is, I think a lot of people's negative experience of maths at school means that they think they can't do numbers at all, and therefore anything with numbers, anything with percentages, they just ignore. And that includes your money, like your bank statements and your again, even though you're not taught about pay slips, all these things are an application of using numeracy. So I think there's definitely, from what I've seen, a strong link between those that have that sort of maths anxiety and that translating to fear of facing their personal finance issues.
Yeah, because, and I sometimes wonder, particularly if it's a tactic used by some companies in terms of bamboozling people with how they calculate certain charges, and they don't put it in layman's terms sometimes. So if you are someone with that sort of maths anxiety, then as soon as you open one of those bills, you're probably going to be scared off by looking at the breakdown.
Actually, beyond that, there's a stat from the charity National Numeracy that 1 in 2 adults in the UK have the numeracy skill we'd expect from an 11-year-old primary school child. So 1 in 2 adults. So these adults are at some stage, they had reasonable skill, but it's atrophied to the point where they've got the same functionality as a year 6 child. Okay, now that's the status quo. And a cynical part of me thinks, imagine if everyone was competent, everyone got a grade C or grade 4, and everyone had basic numeracy skills, then banks, governments wouldn't be able to sort of manipulate the population as much. So I think, in a way, again, they're being cynical, but I think it's not in the best interest of all the big financial organizations, governments, for everyone. Imagine if everyone was literate and numerate. Then we'd have consumers that would fight for everything. So it's almost like, I don't know. Part of me thinks maybe it's better for the big organizations for everyone not to be totally numerate. Although that's what I'm trying to fight for. But maybe, cynical part of me thinks that.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting, and I haven't looked into this, whether countries with better sort of math skills, whether they have more savvy consumers. Like, I wonder, because I know there's some countries where they really put an emphasis on maths education. And I remember we had one lecturer at university who said that in his home country, they would exclusively just mainly focus on maths between like, I think it was 16, 17. Like if they would do maths for a lot of hours, and they said that, and it was very much like not rote learning. It was very much very complicated sort of problems that they do. But obviously the outcome of that was that the students there left school with a very proficient capability at maths. So yeah, I don't know if you know anything about how other countries fare with their sort of math skills and financial.
That sounds like a great master's or PhD research. Are math skills linked to greater consumer awareness? That's actually a great topic. It's a great show.
Yeah. And then just thinking of your media career. So as you noted at the start of this conversation, you were teaching at the time and you're on University Challenge. You really became kind of a hit, if you want to call it that, from the show. Like, I think I remember watching the series, but then seeing clips of you pop up everywhere. And then since then, you've been on lots of different TV shows. So we'll talk about your time on Pilgrimage in a bit. But then I know that you're kind of a broadcaster on for like commentary pieces on TV. And I suppose one of the things I'm interested in, and I know other people will be as well, is a media career as lucrative as people think or not? Because I think one of the perceptions people have is when you see someone pop up on TV, you think, oh, you must be raking it in.
Yeah. So what I'd say is that, again, media definitely earns more than the average normal job. So yeah, they're not going to be struggling. But nothing compared to my banking days or the projectile, even like being a chartered accountant partner. Vast majority of media people are not going to be earning anything near that. But what I will say is that with the media side, sometimes you get doors open in terms of like access to events, people, parties that money may not necessarily be able to afford. One example is, for example, I am a massive West Ham fan, season ticket holder, and through my media work, I've become an ambassador for the club. And West Ham won their first European trophy for 43 years in 2023. And I was there in Stratford on the balcony of the town hall celebrating with the players.
Wow.
And that is like, and reality is, I only became an ambassador for the club because I became a math celebrity and the club wanted to work with someone who's a local educator. And that gave me that opportunity. So I would say that the media side, while the income is good, it's decent, it's not like I'm struggling, it's nowhere near my banking days at all. But I think the side perks of like the invites to parties and events and the people that you get to hang out with and meet. I remember like I recently went to a birthday party of someone that is like a media colleague of mine. And at this party, I turned up and there's Jimmy Carr, there's Mo Farah, there's Emily Maitlis, there's Deck from Ant and Deck.
Wow.
That's Andrew Lloyd Webber. Like, what kind of party is this? So, like, I go along to these things now. I haven't explained who I am. I'm that maths guy from University Challenge. But yeah, so I would say the additional perks. But again, it's one of the things where because I'm single and not married and no children, it's fine. But at some stage, I probably like if I've got a family, then actually these perks is not going to pay for the kids' dinner, is it? By saying, "Oh, I had dinner with Ant and Deck yesterday."
And you mentioned as well that you still teach now and you do that part time. Is that because some of this media, the media career is uncertain in terms of opportunities that come up and the income, or is it also just because you still want to keep your hand in teaching because you enjoy that?
Yes, I mean the media work is definitely has ups and downs, but because I've got enough savings from my previous time, I could be fine for a while, in terms financially. But the main reason I keep teaching part time, albeit, is because I genuinely enjoy it. Why did I give up a 6-figure salary at the age of 30 where all my friends are starting to like pick up notches? Because I wanted to become an educator, so that's not changed. But now I find I'm in a position where I can make a bigger impact rather than just being a full-time classroom teacher. Because obviously, as a full-time class teacher, you make an impact on your 30 students, 4 or 5 lessons, or if you're a primary teacher, those 30 students for the entire year. Whereas now I still see students, but I get the opportunity to influence maths and education and policies on literacy on a national level. So I get to have a wider impact than just my own students.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of the media side of things, was that something that you'd hoped for originally? Like, was it like a pipe dream when you were younger, or like, did you have any interest in it? What are your thoughts?
So before I applied for Universe Challenge, zero interest in. To be honest, I never even thought. Imagine someone says to you, "Do you want to become a beef farmer?" Like, what? It's really lucrative. You can earn 200 grand a year being like, really? And you're like, till today, have you ever thought about being a beef farmer?
No.
Exactly. So the same thing. If someone asked me, had I considered career in media? Not because it's unattainable, but just like it never crossed my mind. Although I loved television and radio and newspapers growing up. Used to listen to lots of radio, mostly Capital FM, bit of Classic FM. Used to watch a lot of BBC. In fact, used to watch Biker Grove with that the old classic days. Read lots of newspapers, the Times and the Beat. So to be honest, I immersed myself throughout my life in media. But when I went on Universe Challenge, my aim was to do as well as I can to try and win it. But unknowingly, my nemesis, my friend now, Eric Monkman, and his Wilson College Cambridge team defeated my Emmanuel Cambridge team. But at the time, I thought, it's a great experience. It will probably help me, as the head of department, it might help me get a pay rise. So I could probably say, I'm a bit of glamour to our school. But there was nothing beyond that. It was only when the episode started broadcasting, then I think a switch flicked on my head. I think, actually, I am getting a lot of social media traction. It wasn't expected. And I wasn't quite sure what the end goal was, but I just sort of went with the flow. When I got given opportunities, I got asked to interview for this and go on this newspaper, I would say yes, yes, yes. Like I remember even the very early days, Cambridge Radio. So not like a huge radio station, but BBC Cambridge Radio. They said, Bobby, do you want to come and review the newspapers? And I'm like, what? I don't review them. They're like, I just went on and I did it. And then, again, from that, I got another opportunity. So I think it's saying yes to opportunities. And then suddenly, obviously, now I've got aims and ambitions. But at the start, it was just falling into it unexpectedly.
Wow. No, that's really, really interesting. And I guess it's a nice, unexpected thing that's happened. Because I guess any opportunity that comes up has been a bonus from what you were expecting a few years ago before you took part.
Yes.
And one of those opportunities that I wanted to talk about was when you took part in the BBC series Pilgrimage, and you went to Fatima, didn't you, in Portugal? Right. And that's quite interesting because actually last year, me and my partner, we went to Fatima because we were in Portugal for World Youth Day in Lisbon, and my partner, he drove a car and we went to Fatima. So when I read that, I haven't seen your series yet because I remember we recorded it because we thought I actually want to go first before we then watch it.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I kind of wanted to find out a bit about your experience, but then also about if faith has an impact on money, because faith and money is something that I always try and understand more about, and still not sure yet personally about what my thoughts are about it. But just starting with the experience of pilgrimage in Fatima, how was that for you?
Yeah, so my family are from Kerala in southwest India. They moved to London in the mid-late 70s. And because the Portuguese came to Kerala in the 1600s, there's a Catholic-Portuguese connection. So my family are Catholic. So I went to a Catholic primary and secondary before I went to Eton for my sixth form. So I'm someone that I have ups and downs with my faith. Interesting, whenever I'm at university, so when I was at Oxford, and at Royal Holloway, and then in my 30s in Cambridge, I always joined the Christian Union. I found it, to be honest, what I've always found is I've always loved the social side of being part of a faith. The community, the network, and the people. And I always wonder whether if you put me in a deserted island with no one else apart from, let's say, a Bible and talking to God, as it were, would I still have faith? I'm not sure. But if there's people around me, yeah, definitely my faith is strong. It's one of those things where I may never be able to test that situation. But going on the pilgrimage show was such an eye-opening experience because we know life is busy. You really get time to think about yourself and where you're heading and what faith can mean to you as an individual. But we had these 2 weeks with some of the celebrities there are people that I've like sort of known since I was young, like Shane Lynch from Boyzone, and then Vita Simons from EastEnders used to be Roxy. I used to watch all the time, like, oh my God, that's bloody Roxy. And then Sue Pollard, who like our parents' generation will have adored. So it was very cool being on a show with people that I sort of knew for many years. But all of them had different faith and non-faith experiences. So some are, Church of England, some are atheists, some are agnostic, some are Muslim, so one person Jewish. So all sorts of different experiences. And it showed me the value of our common humanity, which is our most important thing. We may have different faiths, different perspectives, but ultimately, I think if you're a good person, you treat other people with respect, then that's a good way to live. I always think that, treat others as you want to be treated. And faith and money is a tricky one, because I remember my early 20s, if you ask me what was my faith like, I would say probably it wasn't a bad faith, but it wasn't part of my consideration. And I wonder, because I was earning lots of money and so focused on the banking and trading world, did it mean that I had no time for it? Or in order to search for money, do you have to sort of abandon sort of some principles? And I don't know, maybe it's a bit of both. But what I've always found is that having some sort of bedrock in faith, almost like having a basic numeracy, means that I always try and think, what good can I do for others? So in my 20s, when I earned a lot of money, I actually set up a social enterprise that supported sixth form students from less privileged backgrounds applying to university. So we supported thousands of students over the course of a decade, and we donated £1 million to charity as well. And I didn't need to do that. It was Monday to Friday, working very hard, and most weekends I would spend time running my social enterprise, and I didn't withdraw a single penny myself from the organization. It was everything, my director salary, everything was all plumped back into the organization. And I think probably my faith, and I haven't really, to be honest, I haven't really thought about it till now, but I think probably my faith has played a role in that, in terms of, I'm earning well, I've got a good career, I can afford nice things, go on nice holidays, but I want to make sure that I still support other people that are not in a privileged position. So I think my faith has probably always been a big part of that, trying to support others as well. Yeah,
no, that's really interesting, and that's very, very admirable of you for setting that up and doing that. And I think that's something that I reflect on. It's about, for me, similar to you, it's about that foundation of being generous or kind or I think opportunities for me is something that I find really important. So coming from the Northeast, I was very lucky that the state school that I went to, we had a lot of opportunities. I went on school trips that were funded. That my parents didn't have to pay for. I was funded. I got funded for grants for going to university. And I think it's important going forward that young people are supported and they do get those opportunities, because sometimes you have these experiences and you may not be considering a particular career or a particular hobby, but you just have being taken on a trip to the theatre can really open your eyes to that world, and you might think, actually, I'm going to try acting or what have you. So I think it's really important that kids have that experience. So going forward, if there was something that I was gonna do, it's about supporting opportunities for young people in the area. And just before we get onto a little quiz, because you're University Challenge alumni, I thought that I could quiz you on some personal finance things.
Please do.
But before then, I just wanted to touch on something that I've noticed being a theme of your Instagram, which is how much exercise you've been doing. So from my understanding, from looking at your Instagram, you've done over 100 days of exercise so far in 2024, which I think means that you've exercised every day. So you do a mix of like classes at the gym or just going to the gym. And just wondered if you could say where that motivation comes from. Have you always been interested in fitness?
Yes, actually, it's now 105 consecutive days of minimum 30 minutes of some sort of exercise. So I can't just get away with, obviously, it's my own rules. And my brother says, why don't you just go for a walk? No, that doesn't count. What is a long walk? No. It's got to be something like high intensity, whether it's playing badminton, tennis, a run, a swim, football, spin class. And funnily enough, it's been it's been interesting because there are a few days, not 90% of the days have been fine, but a few days where I'm like, this could be the day the run ends. And today is actually one of them. I'm exhausted. I've been up since 4. And after this, I'm so tempted to jump on the sofa. But I think sometimes, okay, I have always been an active person. I think I've got lots of energy and I need an outlet for that. But I think sometimes when you it's almost like people that build up savings habits. If you build up the habit early on, again, early on for me in 2024 and throughout my life historically, although never quite 105 days in a row, that's definitely a record for me. But once you build things, it becomes almost harder to break that habit. If you get into the habit of paying yourself first 10% of your salary into a savings account, then it becomes like, I do this all the time. Whereas if you just get your income and then immediately go and splurge, go on Amazon and go to TK Maxx or wherever it is and spend money, then that becomes a habit. So for me, being active is something that I've always felt like if I've not been active for a couple of days, I feel it. Although I think technically, again, I know a lot about sport. You shouldn't really exercise every single day. You should give yourself a day off or a light day, but I've not done that. I'm sort of waiting for an injury. But today is the day where my streak could come to an end, but I'm feeling so tired. After this, I could literally fall asleep on the floor. I had a knackering day, but because at least we had this conversation, I'm going to get it to 106 at least.
Right,
you'll see on my Instagram or Twitter or whatever you follow, you'll find it there.
Great. And yeah, I think that bit about habit is really important because I notice myself, even with the personal finance side of things, if I take a month off from, overpay my mortgage or do one of the habits I like to do, I then fall off the bandwagon and then it's really harder the next month to get on it. So yeah, that's good. So quiz time. So don't worry, they're not too hard, I don't think. And to be honest,
I'm ready for a quiz anytime.
Okay. So first one is about house prices. So according to the UK House Price Index, what was the average price of property in London in December 2023?
A great question. So London 2023. So I'm trying to think. House price London. So I think UK is probably around 320, 330. So based on that, London would be higher. Oh God, I'm trying to think. Maybe it depends on definition of London. But I'm going to say 420.
508,000.
No. Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't check how different estimates compare, but yeah, from the house price index, it was 508,000. So
to be honest, that does make sense now. I think in my head I was thinking of flats as well, so maybe that's my excuse.
Yeah,
I was thinking a composite measure.
And yeah, we mentioned in this conversation already, and I can see a football top behind you that you like football. Given the fact that I'm based in Newcastle, what is the cheapest season ticket for Newcastle United? So it's an adult in standard seating for the year 23-24.
Oh, so London season tickets, like my family have had 2 season tickets at West Ham for 20 plus years, and they've certainly got more expensive. But because we've been a member, if you bought a new ticket, it's almost like insurance. If you get weirdly enough in insurance, if you get a new insurance, it's cheaper. But in football, if you get a new season ticket, it's expensive. If you keep renewing it, you get a better price. Okay, Newcastle up north. Is it still Premier League? I'm gonna say 450.
Oh, very close, 438.
Okay, so
very good.
So Newcastle United, they're looking for a finance director. Clearly, I've got the right thinking. Okay, that's not too bad. I'm happy with that.
And the last one, also Newcastle related, is what is the current price of a Greggs sausage roll?
Oh God, you know what? I think a couple of months ago, I had a Greggs vegan sausage roll. I think I posted on my Instagram saying, "Oh, I loved it." How much is it? So one thing is, I had this deal, 3 for like £2 or something. So is it one sausage roll?
Yeah, one sausage roll.
One sausage roll, not VK. One sausage roll in Newcastle, yeah?
In Newcastle, yeah.
Okay, so it's going to be a little bit better than London. Oh, God. 79p.
£1.20.
Oh, that's pricey up north. And that's pricey for London.
Yeah. Well,
Hell.
yeah. And I'm not sure. I've never actually checked whether I'm assuming Greg's have different pricing in different
there'll be,
locations.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you did. I mean, I'm impressed with the season ticket one.
Season ticket. And I think the other house one, I think obviously I got it incorrect, but I think had I in my mind, I was thinking of a composite houses and flats. But if it was purely house, I probably would have pushed up what was my guess? My guess was 420. I might have guessed like 480, 490. So actually, I'll
Yeah.
give myself half a point for that.
Okay.
Funny enough, when I went on, so after Eric Monkman and myself were promoting our TV show, our road trip show on various platforms, we were on Good Morning Britain, and I think one of the hosts, maybe Jeremy Kyle, who actually was interviewed by Today, I think he tried to embarrass, maybe not him, the show Good Morning Britain tried to embarrass us because they're saying, "Oh, you guys know all the answers to complicated things like what happened in 1373 and the second day man was on the moon, all these sort of questions like that. But I bet you don't know practical things. So you asked us things like the price of milk, and I knew a lot of them because back then I was a full-time teacher doing my regular household stuff. So I'm actually above average for a quiz geek for those things.
Good. And yeah, just moving. So we're going to wrap up this conversation soon. So just thinking about budgeting. When it's payday for you, how do you typically manage your money? So do you have certain goals that you're trying to hit every month in terms of what you're saving for or putting away?
So I would say till a few years ago, it was saving towards buying a property in London. And that I met that goal a few years ago. So now it's a bit more uncertain because obviously now, saving towards a pension. Although now it's not saving towards, what about an upgrade of property? I've got a flat now, so I'd like to buy a house next. If I could go back in time, I would have bought a house instead of a flat, not because of the price, but because of the service charges. London service charges are exorbitant. So I think it's, I'll always pay something towards myself, as it were.
Yeah. And do you describe yourself as a spender or a saver, or are you somewhere in between?
So if there's a spectrum between 0 is a saver, 100 is a spender, I would say I'm like 10 to 15, I'm pretty much a saver. I'm quite frugal in my existence, which is why sometimes it's actually the danger of being someone that doesn't spend so much is that sometimes I don't haggle or negotiate as much on contract renewals, because if it goes out, I'm like, fine, I don't really spend money on lavish holidays or lavish designer. So that's the danger. Whereas if I was someone that spent more money elsewhere, I need to make it up in other places like contract negotiation.
Yeah. And you mentioned about, financial goals, moving from a flat to a house and thinking of saving for retirement. Do you have any specific goals for this year, for 2024, that you're trying to achieve financially?
There probably would be to start having a substantial deposit. It could be, I've got savings, but like to move it into like focused savings accounts, like rather than just stocks and shares where it's a bit more variable. I would like to be in a position where I can start thinking about getting another place, either a second property or just moving to a larger one. Probably a second property makes more sense because then you've got that additional stock of capital in a property somewhere. So probably a second place.
Yeah, interesting. And in terms of personal goals, is there anything that you want to achieve this year? So you mentioned you're trying to continue your exercise streak for as long as possible, but is there anything else that you're trying to achieve?
So I think it's to do with my work. And I think I'm quite successful in the traditional broadcast. So television, radio, newspaper, and I got my column at the iPaper, ad hoc at the Financial Times. Radio, I'm on quite frequently on the BBC Radio 4, various other shows, Times Radio. I do a lot of broadcast on BBC and Good Morning Britain and Sky News. So that's all the traditional side. But the new media, I post a lot on my social media, and mostly it's like a personal journey. People sort of see my sports and my dating and my exercise, but I don't really create bespoke reels and content. Like, again, people know me for my maths, for my quizzing, for my football, but I've not really pushed out content like, did you know these 3 facts about Newcastle United? Did you know these 3 things about maths? Like, I want to really put some effort into creating bespoke content because obviously a lot depends on luck and things that go viral, but I feel as if I've got enough of a profile and I can work hard enough, so I should be able to get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok and Instagram, because it's not a formula you can follow. But I feel as if, if you keep repeating things over time, you probably increase the chance of getting rewarded. Whereas I've not really put mine's more like a fun personal brand rather than a focused social media strategy. So that's probably my big aim to build that up.
Oh, interesting. And I'm sure people listening will be excited to follow that journey throughout 2024. And one last thing, which I didn't actually put on the questions, but it's coming out. I thought what we could end with is, if there's, for people listening, is there a top personal finance tip that you'd recommend for someone listening? So anything from your own experience that you'd recommend to others?
Ooh, it's a good question. I'm going to give two. One is a practical tip, and one's like a tip for today. The tip for today is, actually, I heard this recently, someone else mentioned about pensions. You should save half your age as a percentage. So if you're 20 years old, you should be saving 10%. If you're 30 years old, 15%. If you're 40 years old, 20%. So the closer you get to retirement, the more you need to save of your income. So again, that's the power of compounding. So again, if you're 21, 22, and you're saving 12, 14%, that's going to compound significantly. So again, the impact of compounding. But then the sort of academic suggestion is, if people feel as if they're struggling, or more importantly, maybe their friends are struggling, a national numeracy ambassador, if they Google or search or Bing or whatever it is, national numeracy challenge, you can try out these 10 questions, almost like a diagnostic that will assess your attitude and your competency in numeracy, and then give you some remedial tips. So that, as a charity ambassador, I always feel like I need to recommend their resources to people.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'll put that link in the description of this video. So we're at the end of the chat now. So thank you very much, Bobby, for joining us this evening. And it's been great to chat to you.
Pleasure, enjoyed it. And thank you for the nudge. I think I've got a 7:30 legs, bums and tums class I'm going to get off to.
Great. Thank you.